Yeah, I was not sure what was happening. Um, we'll give it one more minute. I see that room is rapidly filling up. Good morning, everyone. I propose we start because we are having a very dense session today. Welcome everybody to our workshop of today, dedicated to priorities for data exchange in the energy field. My name is George Păunescu. I'm a policy officer in DG Energy in our unit that manages the files on innovation, research, digitalization, and competitiveness. I will introduce the session of today to you in a few slides and words. Let me start with the housekeeping rules for today. First of all, thank you for the high interest that we are seeing. And this is why we need to proceed in a certain way to this event, which are having a high number of participants. We are very glad for that. We are announcing that the session is recorded. And sometimes there are problems with WebEx. We find that the easiest way to be is to try to disconnect and log back in, or if not, you have an email from our secretariat, which might be a bit of a slower option. All microphones and videos must be switched off. It eases the bandwidth, and we hope that everything will go smooth with the streaming. For the question, to the panel. Possibly, depending on the number, they will be added in batches of similar questions. And finally, you will find on our website, the one that you use for register, summary of the meetings, or at least indications of where the summaries and the slides will be. The workshop of today is, as many of you are aware, a series of workshops in the context of us drafting the digitalization of the Energy Action Plan. And just as a reminder, for those of you who are not yet familiar with this, our action plan will cover 5 main areas. We are looking today we are zooming in at one of the areas. The first one, enhancing the data exchange framework. And the other areas are covering the benefits for consumers in terms of literacy, skills, and digital tools for empowerment. Then we have the third area of promoting the investments for scaling up, for instance, research and innovation, outputs and results, and market uptake. But the action plan is also covering the other facet of the coin, the challenges of digitalization, namely cybersecurity and the energy consumption, so climate neutrality of the ICT sector. Now, looking at the first area that we analyze, the data exchange framework, what we will try to do is to boost the use of data for the use of the competitive market for the energy services. We want to valorize properly the demand side flexibility. and of course for helping the integration of renewables and helping the energy transition. This will also result in useful inputs for planning and monitoring of the energy infrastructure. When we are looking at the data, we are also having in mind the need to build a common European energy data space, as it was mentioned in a number of strategies already, of strategic documents, and we were asked by the European Council to establish these sectoral data spaces. And in doing so, we are keeping in mind the needs for instance, the interoperability at the technical side of the story, and on the more strategic part, the need to have a governance system for developing that. I will remind you or bring to you a few newer provisions on data that are part of the elements we put forward through the Fit for 55 package. So we have in the revised renewable directive requirements for defining access to data for smart and bidirectional charging of electrical vehicles and signal for the rest share and so on. And in the proposed energy performance of building directives, we are also having some provisions for enabling access to data from smart buildings and smart services. And these come in addition to the data-related provisions that were already existing in the electricity market directive and the electricity market regulation, notably for data coming from smart meters. In the development of the action plan, we have run an open public consultation. We'd like to thank again to all of you that replied to that. Very interesting results, high participation. As you see, around 170 replies. And with regard to challenges related to data, we have seen that interoperability came at top. So it's clearly a top concern. Right above the risk of cyber attacks, which we thought would be first. On the third most numerous number of replies, we have the lack of a consistency in regulatory framework. But yes, this is to be looked at from a broader perspective, also guidance, not only regulation. The number 1 and number 3, for instance, we are clearly aiming to address them through our component on data exchange in the action plan, while the others, like the cyber attacks, cybersecurity, and lack of competence skills, number 4, will be addressed through other components. Just to leave you with the slide with the main topics for the workshop of today. We, as we've put in the agenda and the documents circulated, the main aim is based on 2 main elements for today, with, of course, a number of other components. Or subcomponents. These 2 main overarching questions would be, or areas of discussion would be, to see what are the main priorities that need data exchanges, or the trigger for the data exchanges in the energy sector at the EU level. And we are looking at what we defined, we call high-level use cases that are emerging on the market, and we are using these terms specifically to say that this is a very broader priority area. So a high-level use case would comprise, in technical terms, several use cases as they are defined in technical terms. And then, agreeing on the priority, we need to conclude on, or to assess how EU action could support their development. In other words, what kind of European coordination and enhanced cooperation, joint work needs to be scaled up or set up or bridged and so on. And for analyzing, debating these topics, we have an excellent panel today. I'm very pleased to see this and look forward for the interesting discussions and debates. I will only start the round of introductions by presenting the moderator of today's session, and it's a pleasure to have with us Valerie Raif, who is a research associate in electricity regulation at the Florian School of Regulation. Valerie has an academic background in both energy engineering and European studies, and she is involved in a number of ongoing Horizon 2020 projects. Her research interests involve digitalization and interoperability related to the clean energy package and electricity network codes. Thank you, and Valerie, please, the floor is yours. I will try to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, George. Thank you for the nice introduction. Maybe I can ask all my panelists to start sharing their cameras, because I think I'm the least important today, and so they can, the audience can already see the panelists. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to this workshop on the priorities in the energy transition that require enhanced data exchanges at EU level. I think the title may sound a bit bulky, but we all hope that the content of the workshop will not be and will be interesting to you, and that you will enjoy the next, let's say, 70 roughly minutes with our panelists. As George has already said, my name is Valerie Raif. I have the big pleasure to moderate this workshop today with the panelists that you can already see on your screens. I will introduce them shortly, but perhaps I can take 3 minutes to walk you a bit through the structure and also the aim of this session today. I think we're all aware, and it has also been shared in the documents that were circulated, that modern energy grids and services, also the smart buildings and products that we see emerging, also the increasing numbers of electric vehicles that dominate or are soon to dominate our streets, as well as, of course, system operators, grid operators, market players, and also prosumers. We all fully rely on reliable and also secure data to be exchanged and shared among all these players. And we see in this context that there are different types of use cases that are emerging, that are all relevant for a decarbonized, decentralized, and I think most importantly for today's session, a digitalized energy system. And these use cases can be related to different domains or ecosystems, if you want to call it like that. And today, as you might have seen from the agenda, we want to investigate 4 of these novel high-level use cases. They are related to interoperable and innovative flexibility products for energy markets, to smart buildings and appliances, to smart and bidirectional EV charging, and to the exchange of or access to performance data of operating renewable energy assets for different purposes, for example, optimizing operation and maintenance, or also improving plant configuration. And this mentioning of the use cases already brings me a bit to the structure of the session, because each of these use cases will be introduced by 1 or jointly by 2 panelists, so it depends on the use case. They will roughly take 5 minutes to present and describe the use cases. They will also have some slides to share. And after their presentation, we will enter into a, let's say, more open discussion on several points. And if we have time left, there is also a dedicated Q&A session. And this brings me to my last and final point, and then I will leave the floor to the panelists, because one important point of today is also you. And you can see you, the audience. You can see in the chat that there is already a comment by Rosa. Thank you very much for that. We will take it up later. So as she did, we also invite all of you to get involved. You can post questions in the chat. We would ask you to be brief so that it's also, easier for me as a moderator to handle your contributions. And then I might either pick them up as we go and post them directly to the speakers, or we can also take them up later in a Q&A session. Good. I think with this, we can move to the use cases. And in the order of the speakers, we will sort of move from a more general system view to the view of the intermediaries or aggregators, to the view of more specific use cases at the asset level, let's say. So our first use case is about interoperable and innovative flexibility products for energy markets. And this will be covered by two speakers who will complement each other in providing their views. Our first panelist is Daniel Daviaderius. As he told me a couple of days ago, he's involved in many initiatives, so I will try to be brief in introducing him. He works for the largest Spanish DSO. He has a background in electrical engineering and economics, which is probably very good in today's energy system as a background. He has been involved in the implementation of electricity network codes in Spain, is also a member of the ASA expert group on demand-side flexibility, is involved in the working groups on the implementing acts, and relevant for today's discussion is also his background in European research projects, where he has been working with several use cases and projects on flexibility. And he will discuss the general framework for flexibility from the point of view of the system operator. So Daniel, the floor is yours. You can share your screen and you can take roughly 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Valerie, for your introduction. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting workshop. I don't know if you look my screen.
Yes, you can see it. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. So I will introduce the first business use case, which is related with the flexibility markets. This is a general business use case. It's important that there are many possibilities, many business use case made from this point, but I think this is a high level that will be useful to define potential other business use case in flexibility. On the left side, you have the DSO, the distribution system operator, and the transmission system operator. And on the other side, you have the distributed energy resources, and some of them, they are shallow in green, sorry, in yellow. We have some of them that provide flexibility. They are known as flexibility service providers. So how is this working? The arrows represent the information exchange flows. In different colors, I have represented different kind of information exchange. I think this is important to make this difference to better understand this. In blue, you see the operational information. In green, you see the market information. And in yellow, there is all the information between the aggregator and the flexibility service providers. You will see later. So first of all, just to explain how does it works, with DSOs and TSOs share information. Both should perform security analysis, grid stability analysis on real time. And once they find that some flexibility is needed to solve any technical problems, they should go to the market. They should explain flexibility needs to the flexibility market. And the aggregator is the responsible to submit the bids from a bundle of resources. A bundle can be also one resource, one large resource, but the aggregator in this case is the market operator that offers flexibility. So when the market is clear, the DSOs and the aggregator knows the resource of the market, and after that, the DSOs or TSOs, depending in which product, in which grid level we have a problem, activates resources through the aggregator. This is important because in this role, you will see in my following business use cases that what happens after the aggregator, beyond the aggregator. So the aggregator activates units and should inform the grid operators that this resource has been activated. In some cases, it's possible that the aggregator should inform what's happening with the resources. And after that, we have the full picture. I won't explain more details, but I think this picture works. Here we have flexibility markets and balancing markets. Why I have differentiated this? Because balancing are more related to the frequencies services, and flexibility markets are more general. They can include congestion service, ancillary services, and other kind of services. So I go to the following slide. Here I just try to explain in more detail what are the scope of these three kind of information exchange. The operation information is used for grid security analysis. Grid operators use structural data, not only ours, but the adjacent grid from others, TSOs and DSOs who we are connected to. We used scheduled data. We use market information to make our scheduled data and to make an optimization power flows to identify potential flexibility needs in the day-1. We also make analysis for grid stability, and as another function we do is that we control and we activate flexibility service providers through an aggregator. The market, well, the market knows the flexibility needs from grid operators and also the offers of flexibility made by aggregators. So there is market clearance. And after that, the last but not least is that aggregators controls FSP. I have just simplified this last flow because I think the next business use case will go more in deep with this kind of information exchange. So I think that's all for me. If you want to...
Great, Daniel, thank you. So I think, as you already said, the second use case is connected to the first, so we can immediately go to the second use case and can pick up some of the elements that you have touched upon later. So if you could stop sharing your screen, we can move to Felix Dembski. He's already sharing his screen, perfect. Felix is the Vice President Regulatory at Sonnen, which is a manufacturer of networked home storage systems. By training, he's a lawyer. He has specialties in energy, IT, and network regulation, and also several years of experience in different industry associations. If you go to the website of Sonnen, then it will tell you that their products enable customers to produce, store, and share their own energy. And this is basically the use case that Felix will be talking about. It's interoperable and innovative flexibility products for energy markets from the point of view of the intermediaries or the aggregator or provider of flexibility services. Felix, I cannot see you, but maybe it's just my layout. I can see your presentation, so you can go ahead. The floor is yours. Now I can see you,
Valerie. And also thank you, Daniel, for the good introduction. I will cover the other side now from the perspective of the provider of a flexibility service. To give you a quick introduction how it works, so Sonnen offers end customers, but also B2B customers solutions to generate, store, and share their own electricity. And the way it works is at the heart is what you see here on this slide. The flagship product is just a lithium-ion battery called the Sonnen battery. And customers use those to combine them with solar panels first to drive up their self-consumption. So if you only have a solar panel on your roof, that will typically cover 1/3 of your electricity consumption. Why only 1/3? Because most of your consumption will take part in the evening, and that's typically when the sun goes down and you don't have that much solar power. And if you use a battery with your solar panels, that typically drives up your self-consumption to 2/3. So that's the basic product, around 5 kilowatt of power, and then around 10 to 15 kilowatt hours of capacity. What we then did in the next step is we combined all those batteries into a network if the customers want to join that network, which is called the Zom Community, so it's voluntary. And that what we do in the Zom Community is we allow customers to share their electricity. What that means is if you live in northern Germany and the sun doesn't shine, then we will provide you with electricity over the grid. So we will be your electricity supplier. And where do we source the electricity? Well, we source it primarily from the solar panels of the other customers. So we're also what is called a direct marketer. So the customers hand over to us the right to sell and market their excess electricity in the markets, and then we can match demand and supply there. So, and if there's no solar power and in the darkest, least windy nights of winter, of course, we also, like everyone else, have to buy power in the wholesale markets. And then the next thing we asked ourselves is, okay, what will be the most valuable thing in the energy transition? And the most valuable thing, most likely, is flexibility. And there is nothing more flexible than a large, decentralized network of storage assets. So what we did then is take that network and combine it into a virtual power plant, which we call the Sonnen virtual power plant, or Sonnen VPP. That means we can bundle the flexibility together and then access flexibility markets. For example, we are pre-qualified to provide the most ambitious flexibility service, frequency containment reserve, for example, in Germany, in the Tenet TSO control area and in the Amprion control area. But we also have, we are also active, for example, in Italy, UVAM in Australia, FCAS in the US, etc. Always depending on the market and the flexibility needs of the grid operator. We have that on a business to customer level. So if you're a small scale customer and your market is open, then typically we look to offer you that you can also join flexibility markets. And we also have it as a B2B offering. For example, in the US, markets are quite often not as open as in Europe. So then if, for example, the utility is looking for solutions to integrate small scale assets, we also can offer that with the virtual power plant. Looking at the time, this is what we do. And this, of course, includes quite a lot of complex data exchange with TSOs, DSOs, smart meters, etc., etc. But I think I'll go into more depth during the discussions around pains, options, solutions, etc. So having said that, I hand back to Valerie.
Great. Thank you, Felix. I see that there was one question that I would like to pick up immediately in the chat. Some of it has already been answered because it's on the role of the regulator. There is Aska who asks, of the aggregator. There is Aska who asks what an aggregator is. This has already been answered. But then he also asks on the more specific function of an aggregator, because in a decentralized world, perhaps the assets could also be automated to answer themselves. So I think you have already mentioned it, that an aggregator is basically an intermediary, but maybe you can talk 2 sentences about what is the role and why do we need aggregators in the future electricity system, let's say.
It depends. So when do you need an aggregator? It's a very complicated question, actually. It's not an easy one to answer, but when do you need an aggregator? There's 2 things. Typically, or historically speaking, you would need an aggregator just to reach the minimal bit size in certain markets. So there's typically, early markets for flexibility, and those were designed for large-scale power plants. So they have minimum bit sizes, for example, 1 megawatt for typical balancing services. And if you want to enter this market with small-scale assets like ours, with only 5 kilowatt, then you have to bundle them together to reach 1 megawatt. So you need an aggregator there. Then the degree to which it is automated and the degree to which it is, let's say, manually activated, that always depends on the service and on the need of the grid operator. So that's more a technical question, and depending on the stress and on the need, you would have different product designs there. And then the third answer to that is the aggregator then typically inhabits a new space in the regulatory environment, which is new. He's not a supplier, he's not a direct marketer, he's not a grid. What is he? And then following from that, there were certain types of challenges which then needed to be addressed, so that the aggregator needs to be properly defined so you can take on this hybrid role. And I hope that answers the question there.
Great. Thank you, Felix. Thank you very much. I think we can move on with the use cases for now. So you have basically heard the view of the system operator, you have heard the view of the intermediary, and now we will move more to the asset level that can contribute to the provision of flexibility. So our third panelist is Lien Peters. She's the owner of Think-A, which is a consultancy company in the area of buildings, indoor climate, and also innovation. Lee, from her training, is a civil engineer in construction. She also has a PhD in thermal comfort and heating and cooling in buildings. She has lots of experience with European cooperation, both in the context of several advisory boards that she is participating in or has participated in, as well as European research projects, for example, Interconnect. And she was an initiator and is still an active member of the Bridge community. And I think this is a perfect background for her presentations, because Lean today is sort of carrying a double hat. She will introduce 2 use cases to us. And the first one is on smart and bidirectional EV charging. Lean, the floor is yours, and please, after your presentation, stop sharing the screen. Thank you.
Thank you. Following what Felix already said, we're diving into what comes closer to you as an end user, and I need to share my slides. Wait, this one, share. So you see now a fancy electric car, and that car is our first use case. So the point here is that what Felix already introduced, there is a big need for enabling that flexibility that we have in the system. There's about 28% of the installed generation capacity of electricity that is needed as flexibility. And of course, we can provide that with adding new assets to the system, or you can say, okay, let's maximally use the assets that are already there, or that provide other services, such as what Felix does with the Sonnen community. But as we're moving to electric vehicles, of course, we can use them and their batteries as well. So I'm going to take you to the next slide, where we dive into, so that electric vehicle is part of a bigger system where it communicates to the charger at home. The charger at home communicates to your home energy management system. The DSO might also interact with your charger. That's what's currently on the table in Belgium, that the DSO can actually limit your charging capacity to enable congestion management at the grid. And additionally, you can also have an aggregator managing your car. So that means with regards to the data flows that they really depend on that use case for peak shaving and increased self-consumption. I communicate between the electric vehicle and the car. I need to know the state of charge. I need to know my settings, but I also need to know when that charging needs to be finished. And I might want to know also what happens on the meter. So I might want to communicate either with a home energy management system or with a digital meter. And that communication currently between that charger and the home is not so much of an issue. There's a lot of open communication enabled on that. There's a lot of things already in development also when it comes to vehicle to grid. But when it comes to really understanding the details of the car and even understanding the state of charge and the set limits by the user, that's not open. And that is an issue. And of course, companies selling cars have benefit from keeping that all within their ecosystem, so they can sell you the charger that then communicates to the same brand of a car and even the same brand of a home energy management system. However, we of course want to keep that open, otherwise we're going to get a lock-in and you're going to buy the same brand of cars because you already have the charger with you. When it comes to the aggregator, then of course the aggregator also wants to communicate with your car. So he also needs to have the same data about the state of charge. He needs to know how long you're going to be connected so that he can aggregate that flexibility. Because contrary to Felix batteries, these batteries of course move, which bring an additional challenge. Not going to dive into all of the details, but the main challenge is a bit who manages the assets? And that's an important question because I might already have Felix batteries. I might have a Sonnen battery and Felix is managing that. And now someone else is going to manage my battery of my car. So that will bring challenges because if they work contrary to each other, or if they're going to go for the same flexibility services, that might impact my peak power and hence impact my electricity bill. Then the other question is what data is effectively necessary? When we were doing the study with Ernst & Young on vehicle-to-grid and smart charging for DG Energy, one of the questions was, don't we need the state of health of a battery? Well, that is proprietary for the battery manufacturer, and there's no need in the system to really have that. We're also collecting massive amounts of data, and the question is, do we need all that data? Because one of the comments also in the question was the cost of the data and the data centers. So that's a very valid question. And then finally, when I'm traveling across Europe, the people who own a Tesla, they know that when I take my GPS and I indicate where I want to be, it will tell me where I need to charge how many minutes. But when tomorrow there is an aggregation of flexibility and there's local needs for flexibility, you're literally traveling around with a flexibility source. So the question then is, who should get access to where you're going and where they can actually hint you to go and charge and offer flexibility? So that's another question. And then I'm handing it back to Volker.
Thank you, Lien. Many interesting aspects. I think we will touch upon many of them later. I wrote down a couple of points, but indeed, as you said, I would like to first introduce Volker because he will help or support you in the fifth use case that we will in the fourth use case, sorry, that we will discuss, which is then on buildings. So Volker, I cannot see you, but maybe again, it's just my settings. I hope you shared your screen so that the participants can see you. Volker is a research associate at the Fraunhofer Institute for Energy Economy and Energy System Technology in Germany. His background is in energy informatics. He has a research focus on operation and maintenance processes in wind energy. He also has a vast experience in European research projects related to digitalization use cases in the wind sector, but also related to energy data spaces and the Gaia X initiative. And just as Lien, also Felix is wearing a sort of a double hat today because he will be covering two use cases. The first one is together with Lien on smart buildings and appliances. And I see that Volker will be starting, so please, the floor is yours, and then we can go back to Lien immediately afterwards.
Yeah, well, actually, it's a question. I can also wait until I think Lien has prepared the major part. I think I'll continue after Lien then. Lien, I'll hand back.
It's all fine. It's all about flexibility, so we can do this. So the next use case, and you see the Belgians and the Germans are still on good terms. So our next use case is very much linked to what already Felix said and what we had with the cars, and we're now diving into the buildings. And of course, we know how buildings also will need to offer flexibility, not only because of demands in a flexibility market, but also because of the DSO level flexibility as we're adding more and more electrical resources to the local level, and we don't want to change and upgrade the cables everywhere at the same time. So there's limitations also linked to the capacity tariff. There might also be multiple aggregators of flexibility assets operational in the same building. And that means that they influence what I said earlier already, if we have a Sonnen battery and a car, but we might also have other assets in that building. So what we see in a project like Interconnect is a lot of...
Sorry, but we cannot see your screen.
Okay, that is because I didn't push the button. So going into that building, we see that there are two views, and it's very interesting to see those different views. On the one hand, when we were discussing in the beginning, setting up Interconnect, washing machine suppliers, dryer suppliers, so everything that was household appliances, they wanted a hardware device connecting their device to the cloud. Of course, from their point of view, it gives them a massive amount of data. It's like a huge field test they don't need to pay for. So that brings very interesting views. Now, the question is, who of you really manages this washing machine with an app? I doubt I did it. I mean, we had the app, we removed it again. So there are limits to what it should actually be, but every of these devices also comes with, at that time, which was 5 years ago, the management system or the IoT connection was using 10 watts an hour. So you're adding also consumption related to bringing it to the cloud and being able to access it there. Then when we look at other assets like a heat pump and a lot of battery systems that are not as advanced as Sonnen, then they're managed more locally. The heat pump is a locally managed system unless there's something wrong and a technician needs to come, then he connects it to a special computer, and then the guys somewhere can read with him about the logs of the data. But then on the other hand, you see that what we're moving towards in that big discussion with all the manufacturers in a context like Interconnect is that it will be a mix. It won't be a number of apps with everything in the cloud. It will really be that mix of a part on a cloud and a part that is available directly to the home energy management system. And of course, they need to talk. And that's what interconnect is about, making them talk, KNX, Modbus, Serifization, all these kind of things or discussions. And I can assure you that even the discussion on what effectively is interoperability and how far does it go? Is it semantic interoperability? Does it go further? These kind of things are still ongoing, and it's not so easy because it's a very technical discussion. So coming back again to the challenges here, it's the same thing. Who manages the different assets? If I have these different aggregators in my house, and we yesterday also had a discussion with Rep, like, should it be, you know, the home energy manager that manages everything, or should it be the different aggregators managing? I think that's a discussion we need to have in the coming years. Again, what data is necessary? What data needs to be shared and with whom? What is stored locally and what is not stored locally, what is stored in a cloud? You also don't want to not be able to open your washing machine or run your washing machine because the internet connection drops out. And then another question is, what about the valorization of data? We see new companies coming up that say, okay, you can give all your data to us, and they then can make that data valuable for people like developing, for example, digital twins or online views of the congestion of a grid. So I think we also need to see how we manage that. How do we handle GDPR and cybersecurity in these kind of things? So I put the challenges there. I'm going to give the floor back to Volker.
Right, and I'll start sharing my screen. And you should be seeing it right now.
Yes.
Great. Yeah. So thank you, Lene. I think you touched upon a lot of very important and relevant topics. And as yeah, we've already heard about local storages and batteries and EVs charging. I like to pick up a little on the heat pump side, because I think one of the main messages should be that really this power to heat coupling, sector coupling, is a very relevant sector, and there's a lot of flexibility in there. And this is partly on the building aspect, but it's also possible to apply that on the district heating side if we have larger systems of buildings or larger districts that we power with a large district size heat pump, and again, that's building a lot of flexibility and sector coupling opportunities in there. And then towards data sharing, there's this possibilities to use forecast and have profiles of when the heat is needed in the buildings. That really has large potential to be used. To pick up on the other topics that have been mentioned, I think David pointed very well out how flexibility service can be provided, and that there's either or that there's also the possibility to use the flexibility for short-term trading at the regular electricity markets, which also would be beneficial to the overall system as it brings liquidity to the market and offers the option to have this flexibility used in the direct trading. And then we've already heard about the provision of ancillary services to the grid operation. And then I think there's a lot of aggregators being evolving currently, and Sonnen is definitely one of the largest example for that, and I think that will keep on growing. And we also already mentioned the topic of interoperability, and I think there's really the question is if you're operating a set of assets or you're having your devices in the household that you want to bring into the flexibility service market through an aggregator, then yeah, you should have the possibility and the technical basis to do that. So interoperability is definitely a big issue that needs to be maintained in the electrical system. And so there comes a question, how can we ensure that? And the basic approach is have a standard that all aggregators for specific devices have to adopt to. And then on the other hand side, we see that the innovation and the market dynamics on development of new services and new devices is really fast, and the process of developing standards and building consensus upon standards is much slower. And structurally, you first have the innovation, and then you discuss with other market partners how there could be a standard be applied to that. So we think that it's also very relevant to have open and well-documented APIs that are available from aggregators or from also from device providers, OEMs, so that it's easy to use the data. Even if it's not standardized, you have to know what it is, and then you can build around that and upon that further applications with standard technologies for APIs. So then another remark would be on the energy management system or smart homes. As this energy management and smart home systems is integrating a lot, we really think there will be data security and privacy concerns that need to be addressed with the GDPR. Also, the storage of the data will be relevant, and we expect that there will be OEM clouds that will not necessarily be in EU countries. So yeah, there will be an issue for privacy of consumers, and that's being driven right now in the private sector. If it's the electrical infrastructure that maybe may have another another aspect to that. And finally, we think that there's also a relevance to look for training and involving the installation staff. So if you're installing a new heating system, then the installation technician should also have in mind there is a need for flexibility, and it might be worth using a sensor that wouldn't be necessary in the first place for just having the heating system, but would enable additional services in the long term. So yeah, working with the people and involving the people who are directly installing the systems, I think is also critical.
Great, thank you very much, Volker. And I think with that we can move to our final use case, and therefore also to our fifth speaker who will be sharing the floor with you. So the final use case is about the exchange of and the access to performance data of operating renewable energy assets. And I think we will see it from two sides of the coin, or two technologies. One is wind and the other one is PV. And the first one is indeed PV, which will be covered by Greg Aerosmith. You can already see him. He is the Secretary General of EUREC, which is the Association of European Renewable Energy Research Centers. And that association is also a member of the European Technology Platform in Photovoltaics, which in a couple of weeks will release the European Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda that Greg was also involved in editing. And among many recommendations, this agenda will give recommendations on research topics on big data for PV. And I believe that this is also related to the use case that he will be presenting to us. So Greg, we can already see your screen, and you have 5 minutes. You can go ahead. I cannot yet hear you.
Hi, yep,
Yes,
sorry,
now.
I was just unmuting myself. Thanks very
Perfect.
much, Valerie, for the introduction. So I'm going to be exploring this topic from a slightly different point of view to the previous speakers. So I'm looking less at how you would involve data and data exchange from the point of view of grid management, but more about how better data exchange between the owners of renewable energy plants could help them optimize their plants, optimize their O&M strategies, and their future plant designs. So my claim today is that this action plan, which the Commission is working on, should not merely deal with managing energy flows in the grid, but should extend also to the possibility for efficiency improvements and cost improvements between the owners of plants. And with that, I will just highlight for you on the screen now a few of the ways concretely that big data sets can help the PV community, and these come from that report which Valerie mentioned and which is due for publication very soon, this European Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda for PV. With large data sets, we can improve energy yield and also optimize plants' configurations, their electrical configurations on the fly. Module designs and plant designs can be improved, yield forecasting can be improved, and predictive maintenance and early detection can be picked up from data sets more easily perhaps by algorithms than by manual inspection by even trained engineers. And ultimately, we could find that if an AI agent proves sufficiently capable at analyzing what's coming out of a PV plant, then you could trust it with doing some energy trading on your behalf if you're a plant owner. So those are the headlines about how data for PV could help PV asset management, according to the experts in this ETIP PV group. And who has their hands on this data at the moment? It is consultancies who have negotiated contracts to take a data feed from an owner's plant and to analyze it on their behalf. I've mentioned a couple there, but of course there are many more in the market. And then if it's not consultancies, it could also be those who provide components to a plant which are particularly well suited for gathering data on performance. And I'm thinking about inverters. Huawei has a very sophisticated data collection service from the inverters that it supplies to its customers. And you may also find that plant owners themselves do some data analysis, but these tend to be the owners of large plants where their business is to get as many kilowatt hours as possible out of their plant. As to the needs and an opportunity that we see today, for PV, and I think we may hear this also from Volker in the case of wind, we do need to have more data available for algorithms to scour and to detect interesting signals from. With large data sets, very subtle correlations can be detected, which is not possible with a small data set. And what do we need to do to get these data sets? Do we need to go out and install more sensors and add more hardware? Perhaps not. Perhaps this data is already in the possession of plant owners. And it's a question rather of sharing data which already exists. So this is where the exchange comes in. We could, in a low-cost way, with an exchange methodology and agreements, enable algorithms to perform better and to give better results. I think there's worth pointing out there's a particular part of the PV community that would benefit from data being exchanged with it, or rather made available to it, and those are researchers. Researchers develop algorithms, but they need to train it on data. Researchers also tend not to own large PV plants where they can gather data from. They need to rather negotiate access as someone who does have these plants, and that can be rather a hard thing to do from time to time. What you see at the top of my slide is that I'm talking about an opportunity that we can take today. So, I mean, I'm Secretary General of EUREC. EUREC is an organization in Brussels which we represent our members' interests at the Commission, and we look around at what the Commission is doing today to see whether there's a particular file which allows some of our ideas to come through. And we see that with Fit for 55 and possibly some files related to data, we've got the opportunity to pass some key messages around data access. So although I agree with Volker, and I agree with the results of the survey that George presented earlier, that interoperability, cybersecurity are also important aspects. What I see with today's legislation is we've got a particular opportunity to promote access to data and data sharing, and to hopefully do this in a way which is on a more multilateral, it's more multilateral than bilateral. I mentioned a moment ago that not easy for researchers to get access to data, and that's because they can often discover rather unflattering things, or rather plant owners may fear that they will discover rather unflattering things about their installations. They have to be, a plant owner has to be extremely convinced that there's not going to be any information leaking about perhaps rather poor choices in installation, which will threaten his reputation in the marketplace, or badly chosen modules which have proved to be underperforming. So there's a commercial challenge related to confidentiality that provides a particular barrier to data exchange. At the technical level, I would say that we could do even better with providing models for PV plant performance if we combined infrared images from drones with data that comes from inverters and ground-sourced sensoring techniques. This is something which at the moment I don't think has been covered by research projects. And it's a recommendation also of this group that I mentioned earlier, the ETIP PV. And finally, just a remark on a evidence which I picked up from the IEA PVPS Task 13, which is another group of PV experts. This particular one looks at quality and reliability. They've noticed that it's Asia that leads the world in studying and developing PV fault detection systems. So if we were to look at, if Europe was to look at ways to cooperate in this area, then I think Asia could be a good place to find partners. And I think we've got some R&D policymakers on the call from the Commission. So maybe Mission Innovation could have a look at this area. Thank you very much.
Greg. Thank you, Greg, also for mentioning the international dimension of the cooperation that might be needed. I think you can stop sharing your screen, and we can move to the last slides that we have provided, and they will be discussed by Volker.
Yes. So, yeah, I'd like to complement what Greg has said with a view on the wind energy side. So we did a survey within a project in 2020, or published the results in 2020, and we got responses from roughly 40 participants from the German wind industry. There was a bias on operators, so I think there were 15 operators, 9 OEM responses, and then there were suppliers and service providers and federal agencies involved in the respondents. But the basic things that Greg presented on PV, that there is options for better forecast and performance optimization and preventive maintenance like failure risk monitoring and optimization of operation in general, that holds true for the wind energy technology as well. And I think we can also transfer that to other technologies on the EV side, on household appliances. So I think that's kind of similar for a lot of technologies. So we saw from the respondents that the applications that they see are various, and there are a lot of ideas how that could help. Failure risk monitoring was indeed the ones with the highest interest and then the highest impact that was assessed, because failure events happen rather on the rare occasion, or on the rare occasions, so you don't have a lot of failure events, and if you share data on these failures, you get a larger statistical basis, and that it's just not possible without bringing data together from different actors. We also touched upon standards and the systems that would be relevant. I think that's rather wind specific. I wouldn't go into too much details on that. On the right side, what we found out, we asked how they thought or participants thought they would benefit or their kind of organization would benefit. And the nice thing is that everyone or a majority of all participating roles said they expected to benefit from more data sharing and data sharing across digital platforms in this case. And there was also at least a basic ability or basic idea of there's a share of funding that we have contributed to such data sharing. And yeah, that's in some way also required to make this kind of things work. For today's topic, I think the main barriers are quite relevant, and I'd really like to point out that this contractual data usage rights have been mentioned foremost, and that is really about the uncertainty of what may I do with the data, especially from the operator's perspective. There's the OEM who has the data and has a contract with the operators when they have sold the device or the turbine in this case. And in the early days, there wasn't too much awareness about how data usage would be regulated. Then there became awareness, and manufacturers have an interest of keeping the data or having that as an extra service. And so how much data can be provided? What can I do with the data? Can I provide it to third parties? That's really an issue that's not clear in existing contracts, or often not clear in existing contracts. And that is also, from the strategic perspective, something that is very relevant in the OEM and client perspective, I think. Other concerns are relevant to data protection and IT security. So if you provide performance data, you also reveal your financial income situation to some extent. And the IT security, I think that goes back to what George said. There is the risk of breaching systems, and that would lay your or bring your data in the hands of malicious parties probably. So, but that was not top of the list, but on third place. Yeah, and finally, with the from the operational side, the data quality from the internal system is also an issue. So you have to be prepared, have a good data management in place in your company itself to be able to provide data according to standards that are really valuable in sharing data with others that have to do it in the same way to make these promises and benefits really happen and materialize in the final place. And with that, Valerie, I yield back.
Great. Thank you, Volker. Thank you, Greg. Thanks to all the speakers. I think we have gained a lot of interesting insights into the specific use cases. If I could now ask all the speakers to share their cameras so that we can move to a bit of a discussion. We have roughly 20 minutes left. I think we have already heard a lot about the challenges in each of these domains and ecosystems. Some of them were rather, let's say, domain specific. Others were actually directed already at this seams between, for example, the buildings or the EVs and the energy system or the grid operation. And this is also what I think we want to focus on now in the discussion, whether the panelists see already solutions that exist for these challenges that they have mentioned in their domain, and also connected to that, if you see that there is a need for enhanced cooperation and what sort of cooperation that should be. I think given the time, we will put these two streams of questions together, and I would like to give the floor to each of you again. So if you could sort of be brief in a couple of minutes in your answers so that we can also leave some room to the Commission at the end to conclude the workshop. So I would like to start with Lean. You have mentioned a lot of challenges. I think you have already pointed towards some solutions that you see, and I know that you have a lot of experience in European cooperation. So perhaps you can elaborate a bit on the solutions that exist or that would be needed, and what type of cooperation is needed to make them fly.
Yeah, so looking also a bit at the questions, there are challenges that someone pointed out, looking at the building, that it shouldn't come with additional cost, that it's part of the new EPBD. I think what we forget about in this whole discussion, and it's a typical thing, we focus very much on the technical and very challenging aspects of interoperability, ontologies, and data sharing. But there's also a lot we can do with the data that might be cost saving. Think about if we would be able to connect all these data of chargers, of home appliances, and these data are shared somewhere, it would give us a very good status of the local grid. There has been a test by Thermovolt, which is now part of Ariston, trying to get an idea of a grid based on the measurements they do on their electric boilers. And that was actually very reliable. So instead of, upgrading our grid with very detailed measurements, we can also think about trying to valorize with the assets that we have. Another way of using the valorization of our data is digital twins. There are companies like Swiss AI and IMEC building digital twins, continuously looking for data. But there's a lot of data out there. And I think we need to take the whole chain. We need to take from why do we need to use that data and who is going to be the user of the data, and try to spread it and open that view, and then potentially find these models where indeed the end consumer doesn't need to pay for having his data stored or used by someone, but making sure that there is a valid use of the data. Aside from that, what we see in many of the discussions is that interoperability, ontologies, data sharing, all these aspects are really technical. And I think to get everyone included, and it was a challenge that was put on the table by Rolf Riemenschneider from the European Commission as well, in order to get everyone in a corporate company to align with where we think as technical people it should go, you have to gain understanding. And what we miss is a very good explanation of what interoperability is, what ontologies is, how do you get from a use case to all these things, because you can't get that more economic person in a CEO position to change his corporate strategy and really align with where we want to go unless he understands it. And I think it's something we completely underestimate. And it's not so difficult to tackle if we would do that, but we simply forget it.
Thank you, Lien. I think we can move on to Greg and Volker, and I would like to understand if they share the solutions that you have touched upon, or if they have a different view. And also maybe you can comment on what sort of cooperation needs to be put in place or used if it's existing to enhance the solutions that you would propose.
I don't mind going first, Volker, if you allow. Something which has come up very concretely in the PV community is the differing level of access that researchers in system performance have to nationally held data sets. Valerie and I think you and I were in this round with DG Energy last week, where we also heard from DG Connect. And we know that there's an initiative in the pipeline on European high-value data sets, an act with that kind of title. And for researchers in system performance, it would be very helpful to be able to have access almost in real time to the output of PV plants and wind plants. Because if you could couple that with what you know about the radiation and the climatic conditions at the plant with some metadata, which is also currently in possession of these agencies which manage renewable energy subsidies, then you would be able to, you'd be in a situation where you can write very good algorithms and get very well-trained algorithms on the back of very extensive data sets. So I hope that we see in this proposal for a high-value act helping access to high-value public data sets, that we see a specific action in this respect.
Thank you, Greg. Volker?
Yeah.
Same question to you.
I also think this new legislation, I think I'm not sure if that's the same act that is the Data Act, which also looks into providing data, user-generated data to third parties, how much that will affect also this problem that I pointed out on the usage right situation. So I think there is legislation underway that may help ease the situation. And then I think what Lean said about you have to approach it from who's going to need the data for what, and how will that turn into a business model and make pay it for all people involved in this value chain, in this data value chain. And I think there's the first problem is that we need to build trust between the companies that are or would be required for these value chains, because that's just a cultural change, and it's not obvious that it's beneficial for some company to give data away when you don't know what will happen, and if it's really used for the purpose that you're giving it, or if there's other things that may happen with that. So building trust and having sound business models that really lead to more income and better efficiency will be key. And I think we should also expect that this idea of data monetization and you will be paid high amounts of money for data sets will not happen soon. So there's my feeling is that we will first have process efficiencies and speed up processes, enable new processes that create value, but you wouldn't earn too much on the data set directly. So my expectation is we will see more efficiency in processes, and that will be the key reason to go for this data value chain and yeah, this kind of processes.
Thank you, Volker. Thank you, Greg. You mentioned the value chain, so I think we can move up the value chain and we can go to Felix to share with us his view on the solutions that are already on the table or gaps that need to be filled. And also if you could comment on the type of cooperation that you think is needed to make these solutions fly.
Right, thank you. To make things more practical, the challenges we see from the consumer side regarding data are far more trivial, to be honest. So one of the main pains, for example, is simply just registration with the grid operator. If you want to have a solar panel with a storage system and you want to access markets, you have to fill out some 13 to 18 different forms. I've brought them for you here. Fill out some around 500, up to 500 data points on paper. Yeah, all these data points are somewhere in digital form, but you have to provide them on paper as the installer or as the customer. And we've installed some 80,000 batteries worldwide. So it's a gigantic amount of paper there. And then typically the grid operator doesn't even have deadlines when he has to work on these papers. So the challenge is, getting the right data to the right people. It's a little bit like time travel still, and it's not to the future but to the past. So there's a lot of pain there. Also, if you want to provide flexibility, it's different on all markets. Not all markets have working smart metering infrastructures. For example, Germany is lagging well behind there. So the solutions we see are actually twofold. We are under the impression that in the electricity sometimes that we are too obsessed with designing perfectly competitive markets using non-discrimination. And then if we just have perfectly competitive markets where nobody's discriminated against, then magical innovation will appear. And then we always wonder ourselves why innovation is so slow in the electricity systems. And I think it's because we tend to forget that we still operate in a highly regulated environment, which is still shaped by the natural monopoly of the grid operator. So trying anything new will always be super difficult, and there's typically kind of a need for regulatory support there. So it will rarely happen that something new emerges which doesn't run into trouble, especially also on the data side. So I think what we should do and what we should focus on as a solution to that is two things, two strategies at the same time. One is always have one design principle in mind, and I think the first person to suggest that was Thomas Weishoff Hauptdorf Wirepass, so it's not my idea. I think it's his idea. He said, let's not extend the power line monopoly of the grid operator into the data space as well. So we have a natural monopoly with grid operators, and maybe out of convenience, we would just, rest data responsibility and data exchanges with him, etc. And then we would have created a data monopoly on top, which we then would have to regulate again and again. So I don't think it's a good, if we can, let's try to place responsibly, not necessarily with the grid operator just because he's there, but let's try to define data spaces where everybody is an equal participant in these exchanges. And that's also better, I think, for the grid operator, because if they become the data monopoly, that would have to be regulated, and being regulated is no fun. And the second, much more practical approach is, I think, regulators should adopt a rights-based approach for the most relevant use cases. So in very simple terms, a make it work approach. Where you'd simply say, look, I've identified certain use cases which will be important, which already are important, and I want them to work for every customer who's interested in them. And then I give the customer a right. I give all the other market participants a deadline until when they have to make sure that right is fulfilled. And if one of the parties does not play ball and the customer doesn't get to his right, then the regulator will have a conversation with that party. So, for example, as a practical example, I got very interested in the two processes recently, for example, supplier switching and roaming. So supplier switching is one of the few end customer processes that really work in the energy system. And in the early days of supplier switching, it didn't work. We tried to create a competitive market for suppliers and said there can be different suppliers, and let's see how things evolve. And then if you wanted to switch suppliers, typically the incumbent utility or grid operator back then would say, like, first, show me your contract on paper that you wanted to switch supplier. You, the new supplier, show me the termination of the old supplier contract on paper. Is that really signed by the right customer, etc.? So back then, it didn't work. And then at some point, regulators just stepped in and said, look, we give everyone the right to switch suppliers. Within 3 weeks, make it happen. We don't define the data exchange. We don't define the workflows. You guys make it happen. And if you can't make it happen, the regulator will have a talk with you. Same
Felix,
with roaming.
We also want to give the opportunity still to Daniel to comment on how fun it is to be regulated or not.
I will give that. I will give that to him. No worries. I'll be done in a second. I just want to say we did the same with roaming. Yeah, you go to another member state. Back in the days, your cell phone wouldn't work. These days, you get off the plane, you get this nice SMS. You're new on this network. Nice to have you here. Super cheap. It's all been done. And it was not because of market design. It was just because of the commission saying, look, I want this thing to work. And I think it's a good idea that we picked certain high-level use cases today. And we're looking forward to the commission basically getting to a make it work approach.
Thank you, Felix. So Daniel, the last floor is yours. You have heard many of the challenges. You have been directly addressed also in a couple of the comments. So please, your answer and also maybe your solutions and need for enhanced cooperation.
Okay, just briefly, because I don't have too much time. I think my colleagues have explained very well. We have a lot of potentials beyond the aggregator. I think it's important to have in mind, because I have been some questions in the chat about what is the role of an aggregator. Felix has explained very well. I would to add that the aggregator is an enabler. So they can enable the participation of very small units solving problems that can be the transmission, not only in distribution grid. So I think that this role is very important, and this is why the aggregator can be. Others, theirs can participate by their own. If they don't want to be an aggregator, they can participate to these markets. And trying to answer some comments that have been explained here, I think I agree with Felix that the regulatory framework is quite strict, sometimes it's quite complicated to understand also for us that they are insiders in this sector. And I think sometimes we fell in the same, not I don't say error, but it could be that we try to make a so perfect regulatory framework. We try to regulate all potential things that can happen. And when you try to rule everything, then you can have a very difficult framework that can make very difficult to participate. And I think now we are in this discussion because the regulatory framework for flexibility markets should be approved in the coming months or years, I hope months. And I think we should make this framework to enable the participations to make this as easy as possible. But also, I think it's important to not forget that grid operators have the role to ensure the security of supply, to ensure the grid stability. Nobody is aware of that except when something happens, and it has happened it never happens, but in the summer in Spain, we had a problem with the transborder capacity that was disconnected with an unforeseen event. So I think we should do things easier, but we should do things reliable. And reliability at certain times need to do things not with 100 papers that Felix you have shown. I don't say that, but it's important to make things good, well, and not. And when I look some presentations, two aggregators behind the same consumption, I think this is a good challenge, how to manage two aggregators with baseline. So I think we should do things, but try to do things easy and try to foster flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And we're just on time. So let me thank all the participants for their contributions in terms of the presentations, but also in this discussion right now. Thanks also to the audience for contributing and for making so many comments. I'm sorry that we did not have enough time to pick up more of the comments that you made, but many of them, I think, raised very important issues and are very relevant for this discussion. So maybe the European Commission can also then refer to the chat. We hoped we provided some useful information and inputs for the ongoing work on the digitalization of energy action plan. And I think Mark is already there. So with this, I thank you all again and can hand over to the European Commission. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Valerie, for an excellent moderation. So the difficult job on me now is to conclude based on all the discussions that have happened, all the wealth of information you basically shared with us, and also a very active chat. So this is quite a challenge, but I'll do my best. I mean, first of all, as you all know, this workshop was the third one in a series of workshops that we're organizing in light of the preparation of the digitalization of energy action plan. And we had one last week on data exchange best practices. We had one specifically zooming in on the link between the energy and transport sector with respect to data exchange for e-mobility. And this one focused on data exchanges in energy and what the priority use cases are that we should look at. And we'll still have a few more in the coming days, but I'll say something about that later. So I think it was good to have this discussion to see from different angles the same use cases and also different use cases, and see what explore what the priorities are and what the needs are that trigger data exchanges in the energy sector. And so I think we discussed 4 high-level use cases that we've been discussing so far, and that also came up last week on the flexibility products, on smart and bidirectional charging for electric vehicles, for smart buildings, and for renewable assets, both addressing both wind and PV. So I think from Daniel, from Felix, from Lane, from Volk, and from Greg, we really got a lot of good insights into what those high-level use cases are, but also in some cases, like with Daniel, going into a bit more detail from the grid operation to the market to the control, and seeing the links between the different use cases. And I think also from Lane's presentations, it was actually clear that some of the key questions are the same for all of those, namely who manages the assets, what data need to be shared with who, does this need to be locally done or in the cloud? And I think these questions, I don't think our aim was to find a solution in this workshop, but I think getting the questions clearer was already very important, because this helps us to also see how at EU level and what type of EU action is needed to support the development of these high-level use cases, and also what others to come, and what kind of horizon, what kind of European coordination do we need, what kind of joint work should we set up to address this. So I really think it was an excellent discussion, an excellent panel. And I think that, based on the discussion, we can conclude, not just this discussion, but also the ones of last week. There are a few key use cases to focus. I think flexibility was addressed from many angles, from the grid, from the consumer, from the building, from the car. And I think that is a key use case that we will take up. Interesting, sharing renewable data to improve the performance. And I think also the survey that Volker presented gained some good insights into what the issues are there. From our point of view, it's clear that we did not address this in the Fit for 55 as a compulsory thing. So I think here, what we're looking for and starting from, unless the outcome of discussion is to see which is interested to cooperate on this and take a more voluntary approach. But there is a workshop tomorrow at 3 o'clock dedicated specifically to this, with many thanks to Beck and Anna for organizing. So if you want to follow this discussion further, then please join us there. Then I think, of course, what we need to bear in mind, and what also came up in the discussions, that we are talking about data exchange for a purpose. It's not just to be data exchange, but it is to help the energy transition. It is to develop an internal energy market to achieve our Fit for 55 and Green Deal goals, and to do this in a way that ensures security of supply and a reliable operation of the grid. So I think also what Daniel mentioned in this respect was very important. And so I think we need to, let's say, one of the things that we will need to focus on is how do we need to address this at EU level? What is the added value at EU level where we need coordination? And what do we need to do at a national level? And I think in particular, it's clear also from this discussion, but also from last week, that we need to make interoperability happen, because we're talking about an internal energy market. We're talking about a European market for data. Arrangements to make data exchange happen, and can only at EU level build on things that are being organized or being set up, or still need to be set up at a national level. So I think this is also important. So I think that what this means for us is that we need to continue this discussion and to bring different parties to the table, and to framework. How can we set up a expert group to get this discussion going, and continue this discussion with the main stakeholders, and do this at EU level that involves member states authorities, that involves regulators, that involves grid operators, and that involves also the energy market players R&I experts, technology providers, equipment manufacturers, standardization representatives, and also organizations representing the consumers or the prosumers. So let's say also the future of where the energy market is going. So I think these are, of course, I'm not pretending that this is a complete list, and to go carefully when we set up such a governance framework. But it's clear that from our point of view, at least, is that if we want to progress discussion, then we need to do discussion at EU level through expert group, through possibly working groups that focus on these key priority use cases. And I think the good news is, of course, based on all these discussions, we're not starting from scratch. Do you all still hear me?
Yes, you were
Yes.
interrupted sometimes,
Okay.
but we got the message.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Lane. This is a bit unfortunate. I'll just keep talking, and I hope that all this comes through. And I should wrap up. No, so what I was saying is that we don't start from scratch. We already have good experience in the Smart Grid Task Force, and what we would be doing in the data exchange governance would certainly build on what is done in the Smart Grid Task Force. We would want to link it with what is happening in Bridge, where we gather many of the Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe projects. And we would build on what is being done through the European organizations like ENSOE, the EU DSO body, ACER, the standards organizations, CER, etc., who are really doing great work. Right. So I think to reflect how we can best shape up this coordination for this specific purpose. And I think, of course, our aim is there to ensure effective access and reuse of data for the benefit of the energy transition, for the benefit of developing new services. And considering that this is a very cross-cutting aspect, we also want to make sure that on the one hand, we cover the specific use cases, but on the other hand, we address the links between them and the common elements. And here, of course, our cooperation with DG Connect is very important, because some of these common elements like a European ID, a digital ID, are being developed there. So these are things that can of the discussion. I think there was a question, interesting question in the chat. How can data exchange enable market makers? And consumers are not necessarily the market makers, but I think if we address the data exchange for the consumer to share data, then the market makers can be those new service providers that have easier access to the data. So I think that is a issue. I think the question that was raised, which has also been raised before in the framework of the work of the Smart Grid task, is what do I saw also in the chat a comment on the reference to the Energy Performance Buildings Directive, where there is an article on data exchange that is not just about the metering data. So I think we all recognize that we need to look behind the meter. Then I think one thing that didn't necessarily came much today, but that is something we need to pay attention to, is how do we deal with real-time data exchange versus historic data exchange. And in particular, if we talk about building renovations, it's about using historic data to make building renovations and use the data that are available through this real-time data exchange for flexibility. How can we also aggregate those to make better cases for building renovation? I think the same a bit applies to the renewable data and the technologies and the performance of those. This is more of a historic data type of data exchange than real time. And so we need to bear this difference in mind. I think there was a comment about the work on the interoperability of appliances. Indeed, the JRC is working on a code of conduct on this. I think that this is very important work that we will also, where we are also closely involved, because this is a key part of the digitalization of energy action plan, because we basically want to act at two levels. We want to promote asset interoperability, like through this code of conduct, but we also want to enable the data sharing, the data exchange at the cloud, and make that easier. I saw the comments in the chat about, I think Felix from the Luxembourg regulator was saying that he's installing equipment now, but it's not interoperable. So how are you going to deal with that in the future? Then the cloud may be the solution. I think Laurent flagged the idea of creating an interoperability layer between asset owners and asset managers to make this easier. As I said, from our point of view, we want to make both possible, and we would like to make sure that the consumer has the choice of who manages, his data-driven services, and we don't necessarily want to make a choice at our level whether this is happening at appliance level or, let's say, at the cloud level. I think we are acting on both levels, but of course there is a, let's say, technology legacy issue that we need to take into account. And I think in this discussion, what also becomes then very prominent is the discussion of, do we need to store the data or exchange the data locally, and what do we need to exchange? And I think here the questions also raised by Lane and some others in the panel and in the chat are important. We need to think of or we need to basically, the main approach should be exchange as little data as possible, but exchange the data that are necessary to exchange. And so what can be done locally, what can be done at the edge, I think has the preference over exchanging it. So also that's why we want to work at both levels. And I think this also came up last week on Wednesday in particular, with the idea of not changing all the data, but installing some kind of flexibility function at the local level. And I think that's also a promising avenue to exploit or to explore. Of course, we mentioned e-mobility here. That was a separate discussion last week. There is already a lot of work ongoing by the colleagues in DG Move through the Sustainable Transport Forum. And when we talk about e-mobility and smart charging and smart and bidirectional charging, then we need to work closely with them and with the work that has been happening there. So I think, all of this are elements that we're going to take into account for our digitalization of energy action plan, to think of an agenda for a data exchange governance framework, expert groups, and those things that I mentioned, and see how we can provide let's say, the framework for this work to take off. And it's of course clear that we want to go fast with this type of things, because the market is developing, and we need to make sure that we go fast with the data exchange to make all these other things that are happening easier and promote them. So I think, on that note, let me just finish by thanking everybody again. Valerie for moderating, George for introducing and for organizing such an excellent workshop together with our colleagues Christian and Vissa. The speakers, the panelists, I think you did a really great job, and it was very, very interactive. And of course, everybody who participated for the lively discussion in the chat. So I think, also the level of participation was good, so it shows a lot of interest. For us, it's only, we're starting the work. This is for us to help us to define better where we are going with the action plan. It's not going to come out in June, that what we have communicated earlier, but it will be autumn. So we have a bit more time to work this out. So we will stay in touch on this. And let me just end that, this flexibility data exchange, as George already presented, is not the only thing that we're doing in the action plan. It's also about promoting grid investments. It's also about the energy consumption of the IT sector. So there are more angles to it, and we have some other workshops, like the one I mentioned tomorrow afternoon, organized by UREC. Then we have another one Friday at 10:30, that will be about creating interaction between local and regional innovation hubs, innovation ecosystems that either address digital technologies or energy technologies, and how can we link them up better. And there is another one on the 3rd of March that is organized by SmartEnd. So thanks to them, that focuses on the role of prosumers. And then we have, of course, the Bridge General Assembly for everybody involved in Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe projects that will take place from the 22nd to the 24th of March. So a lot of discussion still coming. Let's stay in touch. Let's keep this discussion going. And for now, thank you, everybody, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Goodbye.